Another one commonly used in jazz is called the doit. In fact, it sounds a lot like the name, doit. Here, let's check out a couple doits. Now, this is kind of similar to the squeeze. The squeeze is written at the end of lines, or it can be on a whole note, or it can be on a half note. But a doit is usually very quick, and it's doit, just like that. So you might actually find it like in a phrase. So you heard that doit that I put in the middle there. It might be used twice like that in a phrase too. Anyway, the doit, basically you just play it like you would a normal short note. But then you add that little bit of a glissando at the end, that little bit of a squeeze. So that's your doit. All right, on to the bend, or sometimes referred to as a dip. This is when you bend the pitch, and it's sometimes notated by simply writing bend or dip in the part. And sometimes there'll be a line showing exactly how that dip should be in the music. The line might sound something like this. So here on that middle G, when I went bo-dee-da, I dipped in the note, or I made a bend, right? And this can be exaggerated, or it can be a very slight dip, or it can be a really dramatic dip, depending on the music. If you're playing a slow gut bucket blues, then you might have a really exaggerated bend. But if it's something that's a little bit quicker, then you might do something a little bit less, especially if the tempo is quicker. But the bend is great because it gives us another way yet to express that vocal quality that is so common and prevalent in jazz music. So another great effect that we use in jazz, and actually it's used in classical music as well, is called the turn. And sometimes it's written in, sometimes it's just something you'll want to do on your own when you're improvising to embellish a line. In fact, it's used quite a bit by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and other great bebop players in the bebop era. For example, if you were to take a line like this, by adding a turn, it sounds something more like this. And it's notated by using the same simple terminology used in classical music. Now, to get some more of those vocal effects that we were talking about earlier, to approximate the human voice, something used quite a bit by Miles Davis and several other famous jazz trumpet players is something known as the half valve. Now, you see, normally when we're playing on the trumpet, we want to be good with our technique and press the valves down all the way. And the reason for this is because if you don't, the note kind of doesn't slot perfectly, and in fact, you get something in between the notes that are on the trumpet. But jazz musicians use this to their advantage, because by getting that sound in between there, you can really, really dig out some different nuances and some vocal qualities on the trumpet. For example, I can play this E open, or I can play it with a half valve. In fact, if you use the third valve and you put it right in the middle, you'll get something really cool. So in that example, I used that third half valve combination to do something kind of in a singing manner with a long note. But you can also use the short little stabs with your half valve combinations as well. And in fact, what you can do too is a combination of using open and half valve in conjunction with one another. And you can get a little riff going just using your half valving. Another great way to use it is in a line, say when you're getting to the top of a line. It gives a nice color. So you can get as creative as you want with these half valvings and just find different ways to use them. In fact, if you do a lip trill on a half valve, it sounds really cool as well. Again, just another way of using half valve in conjunction with another technique, lip slurs. So another effect, seldomly written in music, but sometimes written, actually they write it often in classical music for horn players, French horn players, but sometimes jazz musicians will do it as well. It's called a rip. It's where you use the harmonic series. For example, if I was just to play from low G and keep the same fingering, well, that's the harmonic series of G. Now I can use that as an effect if I just rip up it from the low note to the top note. That's called a rip. And that can be really exciting and kind of scary if you have a whole section of brass players doing that at one time. And you can hear Louis Armstrong doing that as well in those 1920s and 30s recordings, the Hot 5 and Hot 7. Really cool effect, the rip. Another great effect called the scoop is it's kind of related to the dip or the bend, but it's done very quickly, and you can do it with either your lip by bending the air or do it with a half valve technique. You'll hear it in jazz, big band music. It's often written in there. It'll just say scoop and be written above the note that you want to do it on. It might sound something like this. So that first note, you hear how I kind of scooped into it. In fact, a great player who uses scoops a lot in his improvised solos is Clark Terry. He also uses that ghost tonguing that I was talking about earlier, the blocked tonguing. And in fact, he uses pretty much all of these techniques, as do a lot of other great trumpet players. Another great effect is called the tremolo. In the case of the trumpet, you have to use your alternate fingerings to do a tremolo. What that means is, essentially, if we're playing an E, we have two other ways of playing that E on the horn. We can do first and second valve or third valve. So each one of those fingerings will allow us to get that E out. Now, by rapidly interchanging between the two, we get the tremolo effect. Now, this effect is actually borrowed from classical music. If you check out strings in a lot of different symphonic pieces, when it comes to certain dramatic tension-building moments, they'll use the tremolo. And the way they do it is by going forward and backward using the bow very rapidly, sounding something like this. And that effect of building tension can be used greatly in solos with the brass instruments, especially the trumpet, by using those alternate fingerings. One of the first people to do this was Louis Armstrong. You can hear him do it on his solo to Butter and Eggman. Check it out if you get a chance. It sounded something like this. He uses that 1 and 3 combination for the D, which is usually played with first valve. But a little hipper version of using that same concept of the alternate fingering for the tremolo can be heard by Freddie Hubbard. He did this lick that all the trumpet players ended up copying. It sounds something like this. Another guy, a little bit before Freddie Hubbard, great famous trumpeter by the name of Dizzy Gillespie, who I'm sure you all know, was very creative in creating these idiomatic things on the trumpet that used alternate fingerings. Not necessarily a tremolo, but related to the tremolo because they utilize those alternate fingerings. So by using those alternate fingerings and getting really creative with it, you can do all different types of things on the instrument, especially because we do have so many different alternate fingerings available to us. Almost every note on the trumpet has an alternate fingering once you start to get higher on the instrument. For example, from about G, middle G up, well, actually about C. So if you keep going through the instrument, you can find all those, and you can use those tremolos anywhere you want in your solo to build dramatic tension. So just a side note here, all these different effects that we've been talking about, and shakes and squeezes, vibrato, all this stuff, when you're playing in a big band, the lead trumpet player, especially if you're in the trumpet section, is going to be the one determining, to a large extent, how you guys are going to be doing your shakes. You want to follow the lead trumpet player. If they're doing a wide shake, then you do a wide shake. If they're doing a short fall, then you do a short fall. It's your job as the section to follow the lead trumpet. And that lead trumpet player, if they're a good trumpet player, they're going to dictate really well how each one of those things should be done. And it's the same thing if you're playing in an orchestra, and if you're in a section, you're going to always look to the principal player to figure out how you should do these effects, because if everybody's doing the effect in a different way, it won't really line up, especially if they're tutti, meaning done all together at the same time. So be sure to check out what your lead player is doing and follow them. So as I said at the beginning, as a jazz trumpet player, you're going to want to know these different techniques, plus some others that I haven't mentioned, because these techniques or effects, they are born through the jazz language. Being a jazz musician, you're going to want to find different ways to distinguish yourself from everyone else. And that's how these effects came about in the first place. There was one trumpet player who played something one way, then another one who came along and said, you know, I want to try that a little bit different. What can I do on the instrument that's going to make it sound different? So maybe somebody started growling, or somebody found a way to use an alternate fingering, or somebody found out that if I press that valve halfway down, I'll get this really cool sound. And that's what it's all about. It's about finding different ways to approximate the human voice, to get those vocal sounds out, to do something that somebody hasn't done before. And in fact, that's what's really cool about these effects, is that they keep on coming. There's no limit to what you can do on the instrument. And I challenge you personally to find your own little effects that you can do on the instrument, to make it your own, to personalize your own sound.